My name is Nolan, and I'm a student trainer in the sports medicine program at my high school. The following events happened to me around mid-November-ish in my two-story home. I was sleeping alone in my bedroom when I suddenly woke up in that half-awake, half-asleep state. It was maybe 8 in the morning when I heard my bedroom door open. My door makes a very noticeable sound because it sticks when you try to open it, and there are a long set of lights that are grazed every time the floor is opened. I soon hear my sister's voice saying, "Oh, Nolan." This is the way she greets me when waking me up on the weekends. Exhausted from working a wrestling tournament all day the previous day, I told her to screw off and let me go back to sleep. I thought I heard my sister try to come in, so I told her to leave once again. I never checked to see if it was actually her, as I didn't want her to try to get me up and was quite grumpy as I'm not exactly the easiest or nicest person to wake up. Later in the day, I asked my sister about why she felt the need to bother me, knowing I'd worked extremely hard the previous day and likely wouldn't want to get up. My sister then explains to me that she didn't even get up until around 12:30. I then asked my brother if it was him, but he insisted he was sleeping until 8 that morning. My mom, dad, and other brother had all left for a soccer tournament at 6:30 that morning, so I knew it wasn't them. Also, my brother was sleeping too. This meant none of them could have come in and bothered me. It was such a strange experience as I heard my sister's voice, and none of my family are the pranking type. I'm sure I was awake, and as I checked my alarm clock before crashing again. I never know who or what it was, and I'll always wonder about it. It's not the creepiest story you've told, but I do hope you share it, because it was creepy to me. This happened 6 or 7 years back when I was working swing shifts, which usually meant I left about midnight from work and didn't get home until about 1 in the morning. I didn't drive yet, so I would take a bus and then walk another mile home late at night. I was pretty used to this, so I never felt threatened when walking this route. My house sits on the southeast corner of an intersection with a four-way stop. I was standing at the northwest corner, waiting for the light to change and dreaming about winding down with Netflix till I crash, when I glanced down the street to the east at the main intersection where I see a big bank of blackberry bushes that grow between me and my neighbor's house. They suddenly begin rustling. I didn't think much of this at first as we have raccoons. Then, just before the light changed, something darted out of the bushes that definitely wasn't a raccoon. The thing was too big to be a dog, and we don't have much wildlife outside of raccoons in the area, and it looked human. It walked on all fours though, its rear end in the air and face close to the ground. If it were standing straight up, it would likely have stood over 6'5", maybe even 7 foot tall. It didn't run like any animal I'd ever seen, and it used its arms and legs independently of each other. It soon darted under a streetlight and I could see it was all black. Now, keep in mind, I don't mean it was covered in fur that was black, or it was dressed in black clothing. No, it seemed the kind of black that indicates an absence of color, almost like a shadow. Then, just as quickly as it had shown up, it was gone. It darted off to an embankment and vanished into the light. It was then I realized the light was green, and so I bolted home. To this day, I don't like walking or even driving in that area. I have no idea what that thing was, but I'm sure of one thing. I'm glad I didn't notice that I noticed it. I'm going to try to recall this experience that happened to me when I was 16 as best I can. The house I grew up in was built in the early 1900s, and outside of a few renovations was mostly in its original state. My dad and I lived here by ourselves. My dad's room sat on the ground level while mine was on the second story. I'd never really experienced anything paranormal, per se. There were some odd noises, but we mostly chalked that up to the house itself. That was until one night in particular. It was about 4 in the morning and I was sleeping in my bed until I heard a creaking outside my door. It was the sound of the floorboards and something you'd only hear if someone was walking by the door. Assuming it was my dad, I called out to him. I got no response. The moment I realized it wasn't my dad in the hallway, the air got really thick and heavy. It felt hard to breathe and I was beginning to feel panic set in. I sat up and flicked on my bedside lamp. You know, when you listen really hard for something and suddenly you can hear almost everything, like your heartbeat, ringing in your ears, etc. Well, I swear I could hear this thing in the hall, holding its breath. I could hear it frozen in place so as not to make another sound. I sit for what feels like an eternity, on edge when I hear another sound. It's my dad getting up from his bed. The floor creaked as he headed for the bathroom, and soon turned the shower on. That's when the dense feeling in the air just seemingly vanished. My heart began to race and it felt like being released from terrors. My breathing was fast and irregular as I attempted to process what had just happened. My hands trembled as I thought it was about to go even further. That's when I heard stomping coming from downstairs. This stomping soon made its way back upstairs. Oh my God, I thought. It's coming upstairs. Stomp, 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 stomp. It turned back downstairs and began wandering through the living room, dining room, kitchen, and then back to the bottom of the stairs again. Whatever this thing was stomping the entire time and made the entire house rattle. I kept thinking, how on earth was my dad not hearing this? It kept walking by the bathroom door and was way too loud to be drowned out by the shower. It continued this back and forth stomping until my dad turned off the shower. The second my dad came out of the bathroom, I called out to him, begging him to come upstairs. I told him everything, afraid and shaking as I did. My dad then just told me the usual parent line of it's just the pipes in the walls and it's an old house. Years later, my dad would tell me the truth about the events that night. He said he knowed something was in the house. He could feel it too. One night he woke up to someone standing at the end of his bed. After some research, he learned that the man that previously owned the house had died in that house. My dad believes he was just checking in on the new inhabitants of his home. This experience took place just shy of 2 years ago while I was living in the STEP program in Oregon. Located in a town notorious for tweakers, I had many terrifying experiences while living there, but those aren't what I'm here to tell you about. The campus I lived on at the time consisted of 3 buildings that lined the same block, a 4th building a 5-minute walk away called HQ, and a 5th building a few blocks over in the other direction called Michael's Place. There was the boarding house, the men's living quarters, and the sunflower house, the women's living quarters. Located between the 2 houses was the AC. One thing to note about the AC is its history. Before being purchased by the founders of the program, it was a Red Cross with a morgue in the basement. One evening, I was approached by a couple of friends. One had a Ouija board in the boarding house and wanted to see if it'd work. Naturally, due to its past, we decided the AC would be a perfect place to test this out. We all decided to meet up in the hallway that connects to the study lab. Since it's after productive hours, most of the students were socializing and chillaxing at this time in the study lab. It's pretty chaotic, and we sat for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, asking spirits questions, but we were disappointed when nothing really happened. Being the dumb 19-year-old I was at the time, I asked if I could borrow the board. My friend handed it over, thinking nothing of it. And while you weren't supposed to use it alone, that's just what I did. It was a mistake. This led to one of the most terrifying nights in my entire life. The living space of the sunflower house was split into 3 apartments. The first was downstairs and to the left when you first entered the building. To the right of this was a common area. Directly ahead were the stairs to the 2nd floor, where once you reached the top, there were 2 apartments directly to the left and right of you. Each apartment had a bedroom and could sleep up to 4 people in it. There was also a shared bedroom, a shared kitchen, and in 2, a shared living room. Instead of a living room, the left apartment had what was known as the single room. In order to be moved into that room, a student would have to build trust and prove they can live in the room alone. I lived in all the rooms during my time in the program, but I was living in the single room during my experience. Walking in there was a twin bed shoved against the same wall as the door. On the opposite wall, under 2 windows, sat a dresser, while on the far end of the room was a closet. The room itself was small and snug with floorboards that would creak when you walked on them. Knowing it was dangerous to use the Ouija board alone, I performed a few spells I wrote. I'm a Wiccan who practices witchcraft, asking the goddess to keep me safe from spiritual attack and to protect myself, as well as those around me during my session that night. I smudged the board to clear it of any energies that it may have absorbed. I then did the same for my room and myself before blessing one of the crystal pendants I wore around my neck as an added safeguard. I then positioned myself on the floor between my bed and dresser, the board in front of me with my back to the closet. There was a full-length mirror mounted on the wall inside my closet. Just the idea of sitting in the dark staring into my reflection made my skin crawl. Lighting 2 candles, I placed them on either side of the board and set up a few crystals along the top edge of the board. Placing both index fingers on the planchette, I reached out to any spirits that were willing to communicate with me, directing them towards the light of the candle flames and the sound of my voice. After a few minutes, I received an answer. To be completely honest, I cannot remember what questions I asked that spirit. I want to assume I asked its name and any other basic questions one asks while using a Ouija board. What I do remember is the fear I felt and what I experienced after ending the session that night. I had a fascination with the supernatural and took an interest in the dark, twisted, and macabre. Ironically, I also am easily frightened. Needless to say, it didn't last very long before I got too freaked out and closed the session. I was polite and respectful, properly ending the session and closing the portal as I had been taught. I also made sure I did not anger the entity I came in contact with. That said, for one reason or another, said entity decided it still wanted my company. I remember blowing out the candles and immediately diving under my covers. I lay on my side, facing the wall. My heart was beating rapidly. I remember the strong sensation of being watched. This grew oppressive, almost heavy. The floorboards were creaking as if there was someone pacing around my room. I shut my eyes and started to pray, clutching the crystal I wore around my neck. The footsteps moved into my closet and fell silent. After a few minutes, I started to relax, hoping that whatever I had invited into my room was gone. At some point, I started to doze off only to be jolted awake as the noises started up again. Whatever it was would walk the length of my room, slowly and deliberately. I could feel the entity looking down at me. After some time, it would make its way back to the closet. This lasted most of the night. I spent the entire night on my side, begging for the goddess to protect me and keep me safe. I was absolutely petrified. Eventually, sleep did come. Whether I had passed out from fear or plain exhaustion, I'm not sure. The following morning, the atmosphere in my room felt noticeably lighter. When I gave the Ouija board back to my friend, he asked if anything had happened. Unsure of what to tell him, I said I didn't want to talk about it. Over the course of the next few days, the activity in my room decreased in intensity and then stopped altogether. I've used a Ouija board twice in my life prior to this, both times with groups of people, and I don't think I'm ever going to touch one again. Heed the warning of someone who told you to listen. Do not use the Ouija board alone. Roughly a year ago, I experienced lucid dreaming. For those who aren't aware of what that is, it is when you can control what is going on in your dreams as you are aware of dreaming. My experience went as follows. Stage 1, I was with a group of people my age when I soon find myself walking away from them and into a store I've never seen before. Looking around, I soon spot my little sister. The strange part of this was, she only glanced at me and gave this look as though she didn't recognize me or know who I was at all. This leads just to stage 2. A man starts to follow my sister very closely. I rush over to him and grab him and turn him around and ask who the hell he is. The man just stares and says nothing. Soon after I go away, he fades into pixels. All I can do at this point is just stand there in shock. This leads to stage 3, where I find myself falling towards a huge pool of water which leads me to brace myself and get into diving position. Next, it's stage 4. I didn't hit the water. Instead, I find myself in a standing position. The world around me is dark. I look around searching for something when I realize something. The realization hits me, and I tell myself to come on. Reminding myself I need light. In this place, a huge ball of light suddenly just forms in front of me. The light blinds me and I am awake in my bed, unable to move, drained of energy and sweating. I'm unsure of what time it is, but I finally regain my energy and my eyes readjust. I look out the window to see the sun rising. Mentioning this to my parents later on, my dad explained he is also a lucid dreamer. I highly doubt it's a genetic thing. What do you all think? Was this just a one-off experience or something more? I don't know. It honestly almost made me want to pee myself. This started a few weeks ago when I was horribly sick. I was unable to keep anything down without extreme nausea. I'd lost quite a bit of weight, had severe migraines, and I began feeling depressed and miserable every waking moment of my life. I grew up in a family who worked in the medical field and was always taught I should never worry about a migraine unless it lasts 15 days or longer. On the last day and night, I felt the worst I had since getting sick. My head was in such severe pain, I couldn't see straight. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eyes, and I was in a trace like I've never been in my life. I basically spent the entire week dizzy and confused. I felt emotionally distraught. I was in so much pain. I'd lay there in the fetal position, crying uncontrollably and praying for the pain, begging for it to go away. Eventually, I fell asleep while shaking uncontrollably. It was when I had an extremely vivid dream. I could see blackness, but I heard much more. I heard someone calling upon the Archangels Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, and Rogael, as well as something else ethereal. It happened so fast, and I couldn't jot it all down. I'm trying to remember it the best I can. This is when I heard several voices all around me. They reassured me. They told me it was going to be okay, that it was all over now. They promised I'd feel no more pain. The suffering is over now, they said. After this, I awoke. I was in no pain or agony of any kind. I was fully alert and I felt amazing. I'd forgotten what life was like not being sick or in pain. I was happy the suffering was truly over. I felt truly refreshed, and to be safe with my stomach, I ate one slice of bread that day. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm grateful it's all over. So about 2 or so months ago, I was out and about with my mom, when while driving home, I asked if we could stop by a graveyard we pass when driving one of our usual routes. It probably sounds weird, but to be real, I really just like taking pictures. Aesthetically pleasing pictures, to be more exact. As you probably know, if you find the right headstone and capture it from just the right angle, you can get a really cool shot. I wanted to get a few pictures just for kicks, and I'd be on my way. My mom liked to take pictures too, so she came along with me to find some cool things to photograph. Now, I didn't really actually get anything paranormal in the pictures, but the story is still strange. Here's the layout. This graveyard is a bit small. It's got a gate surrounding it, and it's in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. Strange placement, I know. I always wonder what the surrounding residents have seen. Anyway, the graveyard has a paved road that makes a U-shape and circles back to the front. We drove down the very short path and started from the back taking pictures. This graveyard is pretty old, so of course, I got caught up in capturing the essence of time-faded gravestones. Some stood up and some lay on the ground. My personal favorite is one that used to have a carving of a lamb on top but is now so old you can barely make out the shape. There's also a few graves that say infant or baby on them, and some graves that even date back to World War I. It was such an interesting experience, the whole thing, melancholy and all. As I approached the front area of the graveyard, I broke off for where my mom was going to look elsewhere. I found a couple of graves that sat in the ground, unkept and dirty. Then I saw one grave in particular, almost completely buried under a layer of dust, dirt, and cut grass. That's when the most intense feeling washed over me. It's hard to describe. I felt scared in some way, almost like someone yelled at me for something I did. Maybe that's what happened. Either way, the feeling I got was not welcoming at all. Whatever was there wanted me gone, and it wanted me to get out of there right then and there. I lingered for a second, feeling confused, but I then made a fast-paced walk back to my mom. I was on the verge of tears for literally no reason when I said to her, "We need to leave." She of course asked why, and I didn't really give a coherent response until I calmed down. I felt like something didn't want me there. It wasn't like a random thought I had. I physically felt fear. My chest tightened up like it does when you get really scared, like you were having a panic attack. And trust me, I know exactly how that feels. I've had many panic attacks in my 14 years of living, and it sucks. I felt a little dizzy from whatever happened, to be honest. I didn't feel scared or anything. I just felt like someone yelled at me for doing something wrong. At least that's how I feel when I get yelled at. For anyone who isn't as sensitive as I am, it can feel a bit like you're being threatened with a knife. I have to say, I was scared crapless for several hours. I also guess whoever was buried there wanted them pesky kids off their lawn. No hard feelings. I get mad whenever someone wakes me up too. Also a bonus, since I always look at the graveyard when driving by. The other day I think I saw something weird. And I've never seen anything paranormal there before. They have some standard garden hoses around the graveyard for keeping the grass green and a few columbariums on the side. When I was driving past there, I saw what looked like a transparent pair of legs walking. Once we passed the garden hose and columbariums, it was gone, and that was about a second. I did think it was just a person that was being partially obscured by the angle of the sun or something, but no matter how hard I looked in the time where we were in the graveyard, I didn't see anyone in there. I didn't even see an animal. It's pretty standard ghost stuff, but still, it was creepy and I thought I'd share. Thank you for listening. I used to live in President Jackson's former home. This obviously leads itself into some many cool historical facts, but it also leads itself to a lot of history. To be frank, we believe this could have been the site of a slave burial plot. Why do we think this? Well, it's been the site of a few odd encounters, to say the least, while we've been living here. A small story was one day my dad was napping. He kept feeling a tugging at his blankets. He initially thought it was me, and told me to stop. I obviously wasn't even there, and when it continued happening, he shot up and tried to catch me in the act of the joke. The only problem being, when he opened his eyes, there was no one in sight. A short time after this event, he was going about his day when he saw a black shadowy figure in the corner of the room. This is something my friend had seen in the kitchen as well. Hell, I'd even seen it once or twice out of the corner of my eye while wandering the house. As time went on, other rather strange happenings started to happen. My mom's doorknob would rattle from time to time when no one was around. A more recent occurrence was when I was chilling in my room when a snow globe fell off my desk and hit the floor. I jumped at the sudden nature of it, but I wasn't necessarily threatened by it, more surprised. I will note, however, the previous incident seemed more violent than the other occurrences we've had in our home. That said, nothing violent has happened since, and we've taken to naming the spirit of the place Charles. However, he may be friendly most of the time. The situation is still unnerving sometimes. I'm not sure what this thing is, and I won't claim I have a clue. All I can say is my friend and I were contracted for a predator removal. Something was getting at this elderly couple's calves, and it was bothering them. My initial thoughts were no big deal. Bears and mountain lions were pretty common in the southwestern Oklahoma area. We get over there, and that's when we notice they've got these calves in a fence that's about a half of a football field long. and damn 10 feet wide with barbed wire lining at the top. I get to thinking, Jesus, they've gone a little overkill on the protection. I'd realize soon enough why they did this. The farmer seemed to notice my shock at the defenses and then informed me he wished this was enough to protect their calves. He seemed perplexed as he explained that whatever was killing their calves was somehow getting over this fence after killing them. The older man, recently, even electrified the fence to add more protection, but every morning, a new calf was dead, missing, or both. Looking it over, the pen seemed fortified like a prison. The wife told her something even stranger after the man explained he carried weapons at all times now. She said whatever killed their calves will come out at 2 in the morning on the dot, and then would head off right after the kills and disappear into the hills. So, in the interest of catching this thing, I wait till around 1:55 in the morning, when everything suddenly gets deathly silent. I'm talking no bugs, or anything. Everything ceased completely. I'm getting excited at this point, thinking I'm about to bag a bear or a huge cat or something. How silly I was for what I saw. It left me in awe and dumbfounded. There was this huge, monstrous beast in the distance. It was completely dark, and it shouldn't have been able to see me, but it was hunched over snarling with a long snout in the trees, staring right at me. I wasted no time firing a shot off, trying to hit between the eyes. I then dropped to the ground, and before I can grab my walkie, the thing is on all fours and on the run. I aim and fire off another 30-06 shell at the thing, but it didn't kill it. Whatever this monstrosity was acted as though I merely scared it off. I'm not sure what I saw that night, and I still have no explanation, and I was unable to ever find out. I will say, however, it is the single most unexplainable thing I've witnessed in my time on this earth. Four people, including myself, were going through the graveyard at a town a few miles over. We were bored, and that's when the 19 and 20-somethings who can't drink yet decide to do, I guess. We were weaving through the gravestones, and that's all I remember. This is something I don't quite remember, so this is what one of the guys I was with told me happened. I walked into the graveyard fairly normal, and then I wandered off and started at the tiny pond for a while. They said that I stood there and stared at the lake for probably 5 or 6 minutes frozen in place. One of the guys came up and shook me, but I simply didn't respond. They kept shouting my name, but I just kept standing there. They asked me what I was doing and I mumbled, "It's hot in here. I want to jump in," as well as other variations of the same phrase. They finally ripped me from my spot and I started trailing off again. They followed me around and I just fell onto my knees. This is where I begin to remember. I felt like my lungs were burning. I couldn't breathe and 2 of the 3 guys had to help me up. It felt like glass shards were bouncing around in my lungs when I tried to breathe, and I had no idea what was going on. They hauled me out of the graveyard and got me in the car. The pain started to slowly subside and I could make out words. One of the guys just happened to be a part-time firefighter and had medical experience. He asked me about my symptoms and we drove back to my friend's house that lived in the same town to make sure I was okay. He didn't say it then, but according to him, the symptoms didn't make any sense. When we got back to my friend's house, he grabbed his mail and the paper. A couple of days ago, an elderly man living in the apartment on the town square died from smoke inhalation after the apartment caught fire. My firefighter friend finally told me what the symptoms sounded like. Smoke inhalation.
This is a true story that happened to me around 1995. Myself, my wife and mother, and father-in-law took a trip to Jefferson City, Tennessee, to visit my father-in-law's sister. They had a beautiful farm with a pristine forest that had never been logged. We enjoyed our day, and when we were getting ready to turn in, my wife's aunt brought me a blanket and pillow for the couch and told my wife she could sleep in what was her great-grandmother's room. We looked at each other kind of funny, as we had been married several years by this point. I told her aunt if it's okay, I'll sleep with my wife in the same room. It was then she explained that her grandmother had a deep hatred for men, even after death. She said no man has ever been able to sleep in that room or even be in there for very long. They simply are not welcome there, and it would be safer to sleep on the couch, but it was up to me. I didn't take her warning seriously and assured her I would be okay sleeping in there. I was wiped out after a long drive and couldn't wait to lay down, so I was asleep in no time. I awoke during the night and noticed a faint light coming through the window. It shined in the corner of a very dark room, and I could see the shape of a person in gray mist. They weren't exactly human-shaped, but were close to a human form. I didn't realize what I had seen and closed my eyes thinking it was just the outside light, when I realized there was no outside light. We were in the country and it was dark there. I opened my eyes again and it was gone. It was pitch dark except for the alarm clock, and I thought, wow, that was an apparition. I thought this was pretty cool, and I bet myself that was the old woman. I was very happy to experience that, and eventually I went back to sleep. After I fell asleep, I dreamed I was walking down their dirt road that leads into the forest, and I was admiring the ancient trees and beautiful scenery when I noticed an oak tree that looked to be 1,000 years old. It was huge and stood out from the other trees. I walked up to it to get a closer look and noticed the trunk was hollow at the bottom. I looked inside it and saw the corner of an elaborately carved wooden box. It was very old and solid black, mostly covered by leaves and dirt. I knew there was something special about the box, and I just stared at the carvings before I dropped to my knees, carefully cleaning it off and trying to get it out of there. As soon as my hands touched it, it exploded. It was a fatal explosion. It was so powerful I could feel that my hands were gone, and I could feel the wood fragments penetrating my face, chest, and going through bone, tissue, and organs. I felt myself die instantly, and it was the most horrifying feeling I have ever experienced. I awoke screaming, making some kind of sounds. I couldn't catch my breath, and my wife turned on the lamp, scared and yelling at me. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I was touching my face and chest, looking at my hands, expecting to see blood. It took a minute before I could speak. I told my wife the box blew up, and she stopped me and told me I had just had a very bad dream and it was okay. It took a few minutes before I believed her. I felt it couldn't have been a dream. It was way too real. My heart was pounding and I was shaking. My mind had just been completely blown in every way possible. I told her I had to go outside and get some air. I didn't come back in the house until I saw the kitchen lights come on. I went in and had coffee with her aunt, who gave me a very knowing smile and told me to tell her what happened. I told her everything, at which point she said I guess she tried to scare you off by appearing to you, and when that didn't work, she got serious. She then said I tried to warn you. I just shook my head, looked at her picture on the wall and said, "I'm sorry for going into your room. You win. I never go back in there." And I never did. I slept just fine on the couch. Okay, first of all, a few weeks prior to my main experience, I saw something in the sky above my Birmingham, England home. I was sitting in my back garden having a cigarette and admiring the beauty of the full moon when I saw something fly into view. It looked like, well, the shape of a deodorant can, to be perfectly honest. Flying silently across the sky with pulsing red, white, and blue lights running along the bottom of it, and a bright white torch-like beam shining from the top with no wings. I had no idea what to think of it, but, well, there was nothing I could do. Perhaps it would be on tomorrow's local news. It wasn't. No one else seemed to have seen it. Now, on to the main part of my story. I have no idea if these two experiences are actually related, but the former seems to have some relevance. So, one night, my sister was staying over with her kids, and she had my bed and I slept on the sofa. I lay down and fell asleep listening to true encounter stories with werewolves on YouTube from a mixture of different readers. I awoke to one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. I was paralyzed and instantly terrified. I woke with my face facing the back of the sofa and my face facing out for the rest of the living room. As I lay there paralyzed, not with fear but physically paralyzed, I could feel something going on with the back of my neck. It didn't hurt, but I could feel some sort of drilling sensation going on right into my spine. I tried to move, but I was not in control of my body, which was paralyzed but twitching all over. And all this time I could hear a sort of buzzing, whooshing sound. Honestly, the typical sound you'd imagine a flying saucer to make. Then, all of a sudden, a sensation of calm came over me, and I thought, oh, okay, it's just a reaction from the drugs I took earlier. I just have to ride it out and everything will be okay. I felt calm without trying to ride it out for a few minutes, until I suddenly realized, hang on, I didn't take any drugs earlier. I don't even take drugs. And the panic ensued once more. I twitched, lying there in horror for a few more minutes until I suddenly regained control of my body again, and quickly turned around to see the back door curtain moving, as if someone had just ran out. There were red, white, and blue flashing lights everywhere filling the room. And here's where I might add that my living room is on the back. We have a very large back garden, and then another on the back end of that. We're completely surrounded, so lights from the streets can't get in. Basically, what I'm saying is we are far away from roads, and it couldn't be possible that some police car or something like that was shining in. Once again, the calm struck me. Oh, it's just the lights on the internet box in the corner flashing, I thought. But very quickly this time I regained my senses and realized there was no internet box. I have no idea what I was just thinking, again. It was as if someone was trying to implant imaginary thought into my mind, and I kept having to snap out of it. Then, the lights and sound left, and I was alone in the dark, frightened, in shock, and feeling unexplainably violated. My dog, a large Siberian Husky, Arctic Wolf Cross, not easily frightened, was up on the armchair, where he well knows he isn't allowed and never goes. He was shaking and refused to come down all night. Was it all a dream? Well, considering I didn't get back to sleep, I very much doubt it. The rest of the night I laid awake, still twitching and feeling a weird sensation of cold shooting down my spine and nerve endings every minute. I don't know what it was. Aliens were all I could think. But the next day when I told my friends, they had a little laugh, and then one said, "Well, you said you felt something messing with the back of your neck. Let's see if there are any marks." They all looked, and were shocked and sat in silence. There were these 3 small red puncture marks in the shape of a triangle, right on my spine. It's been a while since anything has happened to me, but let me tell you that I have witnessed some strange things in my early teen years. I never really believed so much in the paranormal, or any myths about strange creatures or ghosts. So, to be blunt, I was basically a skeptic. My first incident happened when I got out of school one day and walked home. Everything was quiet and the wind was still as could be, but I just got a weird feeling that someone, or something, was present. I got home as usual and began to play some Red Dead Redemption in my room. I always was caught up in the game, and I never paid attention to my surroundings other than my occasional sibling bothering me, but no one was home during that day. I started to feel uneasy, and I had the sudden urge to look at my door when out of nowhere, a very bright figure dashed across the hallway into my little brother's room. I nearly lost it as it happened. My mouth was down to the floor as I was frozen in much fear. I grabbed my old ruined bat I had in my room and carefully snuck out of my room and peered into my brother's. Naturally, I didn't find anything or anyone. All I know is that it was definitely had something to do with the next incident. So it's the same year, and towards the winter time, I was having trouble sleeping and stayed up very late. The next morning, I woke up but was still laying in bed when I heard my mom call my name. I knew my brother was already up and brushing his teeth, But then I noticed movement next to me on my bed, an incident in the bed, and thought it might have been a cat. However, when I turned over, I saw nothing, and at that same moment my covers flew right off me. I was in total shock and in tears. I ran and told my mom, but she thought I was just tired and didn't want to go to school that day. I never told anyone other than my cousin, but to this day it creeps me the hell out. Who or what did this thing want? I don't know, and I sure hope not to come into contact with it ever again. If any of you know what this could be, maybe just some angry ghost or some sort of demon, please let me know in the comments. My name is Jessica, and when I was in my mid-20s, I used to house sit for a couple who went on a lot of trips. They had a huge house with a great big gorgeous yard, so it was a welcome change from my tiny apartment. It was a 2-story house, but I hardly ever went upstairs. The only thing up there was an office, a bedroom, a bathroom, and an attic-like storage area that gave me the creeps. The attic, however, wasn't the problem. The bedroom was. The first time I stayed there, I was exploring the rooms of the house and went into the upstairs bedroom. The door was always closed, which I thought was odd, since all the other doors were left open. Walking into that room was like walking into a freezer. The whole house was warm, but this room was absolutely freezing. I didn't think too much of it, and chalked it up to not getting the heat from the rest of the house since the door was closed. Looking back, that doesn't make sense since the vents in that room weren't closed. Inside the room was a very simple setup. A bed with a nightstand next to it that had a lamp and an old-timey phone. Temperature aside, the room itself was creepy. The lampshade, window curtains, bed comforter, nightstand, tablecloth, and even the closet hangings were all made from the same fabric. I should mention this was very different from the style in the rest of the house, so it was pretty out of character. I got a weird vibe like I wasn't supposed to be in there, so I immediately left, and any time my house sat, I stayed away from that room. In the master bedroom where I stayed, there was a very old photo that I always assumed was of the house. There was an elderly couple posing in front of it, and their clothes reminded me of the style from the upstairs bedroom. Very old-fashioned. The photo was creepy too. I felt like the woman in it was watching me anytime I walked by. Fast forward a few house sittings later, and I had some friends staying with me. To give them their own bed, I let them sleep in the upstairs room. I joked to them about it being haunted when they walked in and felt how cold it was. They slept there that night and all was fine. They left the next day. I hadn't washed the linens or made the bed yet and left the bedroom door open, thinking nothing of it. The next night, sometime around 2 a.m., I woke to the alarm clock by the bed going off. I assumed the owners must have it set to auto, so I shut it off, fell back asleep. But it went off again a few minutes later. This time I figured I must have hit the snooze button the first time, so I made sure it was off and unplugged it from the wall. As I tried to fall back asleep, I realized I had been there for several days. Why hadn't the alarm gone off any other day? Also, why would they have an alarm set to go off in the middle of the night? As I was pondering this, the alarm went off yet again. Unplugged. All settings set to off. I was freaked out, so I put the alarm clock in another room and went back to bed. The next night, I woke up chilled because the covers were at the bottom of the bed. I pulled them up and was almost back to sleep when I felt something tugging at the blanket. I was paralyzed with fear at this point. I could feel something on the top of me pulling at the blankets. I finally got the courage to jump up and turn on the light, and nothing was there. I didn't fall back to sleep that night. The next day, I called my best friend and begged her to come stay with me, to which she agreed. Now, I should mention the bedroom door had a complicated lock system, which I always engaged before going to bed. That night, we fell asleep after chatting for about an hour. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw her standing by the door. I assumed she was trying to figure out how to unlock it, and was trying not to wake me. I closed my eyes to go back to sleep and stretched out. As I did that, I kicked her. I sat up straight and saw that she was laying next to me fast asleep. I know I saw her by the door, but it couldn't have been because she was still in bed with me. I turned the light on and eventually fell back asleep, but not a deep sleep. I was weary and kept waking up to look around. The next day I cleaned the upstairs bedroom and shut the door. I think disturbing the room and leaving the door open was a mistake. Nothing has happened to me again, but I was too afraid to test my theory by leaving the door open again. I sometimes wonder if it was the woman in the photo. Maybe she likes that room left alone and stand frozen in time. I moved to a small town about 2 years ago, a year of which I felt an uneasiness inside and outside my house. At night, the floorboards creak. There are dark shadows and silhouettes on my wall when there is no light and there is banging on doors and from the cupboard inside my room. These events are reoccurring. Ever since I was little, I've had this feeling of being watched by something I cannot see. I remember nightmares that would have me screaming in primary school. They only got worse as I aged. I have a friend who has been having similar, but not completely identical experiences. She used to be a big fan of dolls and collected them growing up, and only recently lost her love for them. She's been trying to sell the dolls, but one doll has a particularly creepy aura about it. The doll has been seen moving at night, staring at her in places she didn't leave it, and screaming and wailing in the middle of the night. Anyways, I've been looking after said creepy doll for the past week while she keeps the other dolls she's trying to sell in a room that's packed. This doll is pretty big. The doll had been in my room, but far away from me for a bit, when I started thinking there wasn't anything inside the doll. Skeptical, I decided to set up a camera on my phone to monitor the doll while I was downstairs eating dinner. I didn't notice any movement and was disappointed till I reviewed the footage closer and noticed when I shut the light off, not thinking, her left eye turned a blood red from the normal bluish green. And when I went upstairs and turned the light back on to check my camera, her eye color returned to normal. 2 nights prior to this, I had awoken in the middle of the night to the feeling of someone pressing down into my bed. I couldn't see what or who it was. Although I wanted to turn on the bedside light, I couldn't as my arms were pinned and I had a feeling of hair touching my nose. I don't remember what happened after this as I slipped back into sleep. The next morning I awoke to an ugly bruise on my arm. Appalled and shaken up, I told my friend, who also grew worried. Anytime my friend or I looked into the doll's eyes, we would feel this weird energy. It would feel like it was draining our own energy. It's a feeling my friend has described for having for years, and needless to say, I don't love the feeling. Sadly, we still don't have answers as to what is happening, and no one we know believes us. Hopefully, we can get rid of that damn doll soon. Let's just cut to the chase. My sister and her friends bought a house, and within a week of moving in, they were dancing and goofing off when my sister's friend, Tarsh, fell and landed on the floor of the wardrobe that was open, leaving a hole in the ground. That's how old this house was. It was easily broken. Upon inspecting the damage, they found a Ouija board inside the hole. They put the board away until one night when some of their guy friends came over to have a housewarming party. They decided to light some candles, and my sister, her friend Tarsh, and one of other friends played with the board while the others sat around and watched. My sister asked the usual questions of "Is anyone there? Can you move something?" etc. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until she asked, "Are you human?" Suddenly the planchette moved quickly to yes. My sister took her hands off the planchette and told her friends to stop screwing around, at which point they all got into an argument swearing they had thought the other one was moving it. This lasted about 5 minutes before they resumed playing, this time asking if whoever they were communicating with had a name. The planchette then spelled out David. After this, they asked, "How did you die?" David responded he was murdered by his father back in the 1990s with an axe to the head. He went on to say that he was buried in the backyard. It was at this point my sister's friends started laughing and telling whoever was messing with the planchette to stop messing around. My sister responded by telling them to shut up, at which point one of the guys, we'll call him Cody, got upset. But before he could say anything, the candle suddenly blew out. Aggravated, Cody told them to stop messing around and turn the lights on. As soon as he said this, the window they were sitting in front suddenly shattered. At this point, everyone in the room was anxious and just wanted to leave. Cody suggested they burn the Ouija board instead, and everyone agreed. They went out and burned the board at a makeshift bonfire. A few weeks later, they were all walking back from a house party when Chelsea, one of their mates, dropped their bag. Everyone stared in shock as the Ouija board they all watched burn fell out onto the ground. The board still looked fine, unscathed even. Cody immediately grabbed the board, held it in place against the curb and stomped on it, snapping the board in half. They all then walked home, afraid of their lives. They had Cody stay over with them that night. 2 days later, my sister was coming home for the holidays. It was the second day she was there, and around 4 p.m., she was passed out when she suddenly jolted awake. Worried about my sister, I asked her what was wrong. My sister explained she had a nightmare that she was levitating and a teen she didn't know was shouting something she couldn't hear. But the expression on his face was that of anger and hatred. Soon after, she told me everything that had happened prior to her and her friends. I scare easily, and so I was pretty freaked out. My sister then looked at her phone and realized she had gotten a message from her friend Chelsea, only a couple minutes prior to her waking up, telling her she had this horrible nightmare where she was levitating and a teenage guy was yelling at her. They both said they couldn't hear the teen, but they thought maybe it was David communicating with them, and that he may be angry that they snapped the board. Perhaps it was the only way to free his spirit. My sister is convinced to this day that David wasn't evil. Perhaps he was just alone. But I guess we'll never really know. My first experience with a Ouija board was when I was a teenager in high school in 1990. My friend Jennifer, who lived across the street from me, had one, and all her friends who ever used it with her only did so once before swearing it off. My best friend Sarah even avoided walking into the basement if the board was in sight. I would always laugh about these things, believing it was more likely the power of suggestion and Jennifer moving the board herself. My friends were always the fun type, and so I wouldn't put it past them to pull some shenanigans with the Ouija board to liven up sessions. Curious, I asked Jennifer if she would play the board with me. She was more than happy to oblige my curiosity, but immediately told me there were some ground rules we needed to go over. The rules were simple: never play by yourself, even by accident. Also, never let go of the planchette, no matter what. The first rule was that we put our hand on and take them off the planchette at the same time, but never before saying goodbye. I laughed at this, thinking it was a story to play along with, but I agreed to the terms mentioned. Before continuing, there is a story I should mention that led to all of this. We had a formal dance coming in 2 days, and I couldn't go because I did not get a dress. I'd recently broken up with my boyfriend, and as such, didn't wish to see other couples dancing. Eventually, I found out a bunch of my friends were going stag, but I hadn't bought a dress, and so that led to me going to Jennifer's and trying out the Ouija board instead. I'm a skeptic, if it isn't obvious by now, so I went into this whole thing with an "I'm going to bust you" kind of thought process, as opposed to giving it all the respect I probably should have in hindsight. We wound up contacting a little boy, though today I don't believe that was the case at all. That was being held captive by a very large man called SEG. Things went on as I still was not buying the fact that we were talking to anyone from the other side, thinking SEG was just Jennifer messing with me. I decided to test him. Knowing I wasn't going to the dance, I asked SEG if I was going to the dance. He spelled out yes. I laughed at this and told Jennifer she knew I wasn't going, at which point she just shrugged and we continued our session. Thinking I was smart, I asked SEG what color dress I would wear. He spelled out blue. At this point, I was over it and told Jennifer the board was stupid. No sooner had I said that, the planchette violently started moving back and forth in a stabbing motion. We were struggling to keep our hands on the planchette when Jennifer screamed to me to say goodbye. We then did so and forced the planchette over to goodbye. Jennifer looked terrified. It was then I noticed that she really didn't seem to be acting. She was genuinely afraid as she put the board away and was shaken up for a while after that. Things got stranger when I went home, only for my parents to knock on my bedroom door with a wardrobe bag at hand. They said they didn't want me to miss out on the formal, and they got a few dresses from my older sister who wanted me to have them, so I could choose what to wear to dance. Opening the bag, I saw 4 prom dresses that were pink, peach, yellow, and light blue. The only one that fit properly, and currently was, you guessed it, the blue one. I wound up going to the dance that night with my friend, wearing the blue dress. Over the years, I've retold this story with the idea that everything must have been a coincidence. But, inside, I can't help but ask myself, was it really a coincidence? As an adult, I eventually moved into an apartment with my ex. My best friend lived there with us as well, as the girl who originally lived there moved out about 3 months after, but for some reason kept paying rent and utilities, which is a real mystery to this day. We found an old Ouija board outside in a dumpster and thought it might be fun to bring it in, clean it up, and use it for fun at our new place. I know, I still hadn't learned my lesson yet. Eventually, I broke the rules and played on my own, calling out SEG once again. I was hoping to prove to myself that this was all nonsense, but that wasn't what happened. There were other things that showed up during my attempts to contact SEG. Things that entered our world. The rest of our time in our apartment, we would hear deep voices, things that would move on their own, and I felt something touching me when I slept. It got to the point that this was aggressive enough that I refused to sleep if no one else was home with me. A heavy canister fell from a shelf at one point and missed my head by mere inches. This was when we decided to call in a priest. I wasn't Catholic, but my ex was, to come bless the apartment. One morning, I awoke completely paralyzed for hours. It was this absolutely terrible and evil thing that did it. I was sure whatever I'd released from the board was the reason for all of this. The thing would touch me inappropriately when I tried sleeping, and at one point my best friend and my ex swore that the thing had possessed me for a time. They didn't see me, but saw it in my body during this time frame. We were never depressed people, but this gave us nightmares, and in them, goaded us on, telling us that it wanted us to kill ourselves. Finally, we had had enough. We threw the board back in the dumpster and moved out soon after that. We never had another incident after moving out of the place. 9 or 10 months later, we heard a story about a man we used to know in our old apartment who got arrested for setting off soda bombs in an old apartment. We knew the man well enough, but he wasn't crazy. He said his reasoning for setting off the stuff was to scare away the thing that kept telling him to kill himself. To this day, I will not touch nor own a Ouija board ever again. I understand why people laugh when mentioning Ouija boards. I did once too. When it happens to you, you won't be laughing anymore. I pray it never does. I hope you'll heed my warning and stay away from them. Playing with one is like ringing the dinner bell for wolves, telling demons I'm here, come get me. Take the warning seriously, people. It could actually save your life one day. These stories really creeped me out, as I hope they did to you. If you have a creepy story with something that you can't explain, be sure to send it in to swampdweller.net or the email that you can find in the description down below. I would very much enjoy seeing your stories and sharing them with everyone here in the swamp. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the channel, why not subscribe, turn on notifications to never miss another video, as I upload them almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. I myself have had quite a few paranormal experiences I can't explain myself. Comment down below if you'd like to hear me tell them in a future video. See you guys soon with another creepy video.